I'm Mark Medina with the Los Angeles Times, and we're presenting another edition of Lakers Roundtable, this time previewing Game 3 of the Phoenix Suns Lakers Western Conference Finals matchup. And to help us preview that upcoming game later today is the Arizona Republic's Paul Coro. Paul, how are you doing today?
Great, ready for a game. These gaps are killing me.
Yeah, seriously. How do you think the long stretch between Game 2 and 3? How much of an effect do you think that will have?
It probably was good for the Suns. They needed to regather their confidence. They were a bit shook after the way they were beat in the first two games. They hadn't taken losses like that since January. They played 800 ball since the late January and never lost consecutive games. And to be beaten so badly twice and have two of their worst defensive games, I think they needed some time to recover from that and obviously make some adjustments because what they did wasn't working.
Yeah, and you know what? One of the adjustments you mentioned in the paper was maybe to simplify the defensive style. Can you kind of take us through just what wasn't working from Phoenix's end and how they plan to adjust on that front?
Yeah, well, this kind of goes back to last season, and, when they missed the playoffs last year, one of the adjustments over the offseason and in training camp that Alvin Gentry made was to simplify the defense. He felt like, they had too many things coming at them. They weren't good at any one thing, but they were trying to do a bunch of things. And so they had really kept to some basic principles about how they would play screen and rolls this year and things like that. But with this series, and so many things to counter with the Lakers, they tried a few more things. They were obviously doubling Kobe. They were trying to front the post. They went to zone defense for a little while. That was just disastrous at the end of the first quarter. So they're not obviously an open book about what they're going to do, but they pretty much said that they're going to simplify things and try to get back to what they've done all season with some basic ideas and hopefully that'll kind of narrow their focus because there was times where, especially Amari Stoudemire just kind of looked like he was drifting out there. And he was put in some bad situations, too, where he was playing the two-man game and showing on Kobe outside the three-point line and then being asked to recover when Gasol rolled to the basket. And he not only can't, make up that 20 feet of ground in a hurry, but, also they weren't having the help defense there to cover for him.
We're talking with the Arizona Republic's Paul Coro. You can also follow him on Twitter at twitter.com/Paul Coro. And you mentioned Amari Stoudemire's play, and there was an ESPN.com report that came out suggesting that he would leave after the season. Now, you had talked to him, and he stated that it wasn't the case, that he hadn't made a decision. Ultimately, where do you think he's going to be wind up next year?
Yeah, it's been an interesting few months because they were obviously one phone call away from making a deal. If the right offer had come along, they probably would have pulled the trigger on a trade. And we're in heavy talks about doing so. But then he played like he did down the stretch, and he was incredible. He was trying defensively. He was a good teammate. He had tried to really embrace the idea of being a leader, and obviously couldn't be stopped on the offensive end and rebounded better. And then all that just kind of gone away these last two games, and a lot of that has to do with the Lakers, and he's always struggled a little bit against teams that are longer. I think he's got his points, and he's picked the right spots to do so. Taking the outside jumpers is what he's supposed to do. But to get back to your question about his long-term future, I think it just has thrown everything up for debate a little bit more about whether the Suns invest in him long term. Because if they do, they pretty much locked up their roster. They wouldn't have a lot of flexibility. And then the other side was that he had been really put off by trade rumors back in February, and they had mended that up. And he's never had as good a coaching relationship as he does with Alvin Gentry, and he likes his teammates. Phoenix is the only city he's known as a professional, so there was a lot of things keeping him here. But at the same time, the way he played down the stretch made him a very viable free agent commodity. And there's a lot of teams out there with space, and as some of these other free agents get plucked off and stay home, his name becomes of more value to the point where, you know, other teams might be more willing to pay him than Phoenix is.
Of course, another free agent story that's been coming out is obviously LeBron James, and what's interesting is Suns general manager Steve Kerr was just fined $10,000 for making somewhat of a joke on the Dan Patrick show recently, where he jokes that they would take him at the mid-level. What do you make of all this? I mean, obviously Mark Cuban got fined $100,000 for making comments that he would try to get him to a sign and trade. What do you make of the NBA kind of stamping down on these?
Yeah, I'm mad because we're going to lose Steve Kerr's sense of humor. You know, he's going to be gun shy on cracking any more jokes now. I mean, it was just a kind of a glib line, like, "Hey, if LeBron wants to take the mid-level, we'll give it to him." You know, is that really tampering? I mean, by the letter of the CBA, I guess it is, but I don't know. Does that mean New Jersey is now going to start making jokes about if he'll take the mid-level, we'll take him? And
David Stern finding himself for mentioning that he would hope that LeBron would stay in Cleveland. I mean, is that going to happen too?
Right. Initially, they didn't say what the quote was that Kerr got fined for, and I thought it was because he had commented elsewhere that, you know, he hoped LeBron stayed at Cleveland. Danny Ferry's a real good friend of Kerr's, and, you know, he pulls for the small markets to be able to hold on to their players. And so I thought it was for that. You know, I thought maybe that's how literally they're taking the law. But, you know, if they're going to take it that literally, as it was pointed out to me yesterday, there's a headline on the Chicago Bulls official website that says LeBron to Chicago with a question mark. So, I don't know which one is more leading, a team website
right,
advocating LeBron coming to them, or Steve Kerr making a joke that has no possibility of coming true.
Well, they always have that disclaimer at the bottom, though, that they haven't authorized this article, right? I guess they could get out of it by citing that, I guess.
Yeah, I'm sure that will probably cover them in this case.
Now, what I found particularly interesting in this series so far, with the Lakers up 2-0, is the bench. Phoenix came in, largely credited with the contributions they have made this season and in the postseason, and Lakers reserves have been known to be somewhat inconsistent since Lamar Odom, but it's definitely not been the case so far in the first two games. How do you explain that?
Well, the Laker guys really stepping up. I mean, Odom obviously is a nightmare matchup for the Suns. I mean, they're almost, as much as they feared the size, they're almost better off with buying him on the floor than Odom. The worst thing that might have happened to him was any limitations on buying him speed, because I just get more Odom time on the court, and he just picks them apart with their abilities to put him in different places. You know, have him be when he's a perimeter passer and he pulls a big man outside, and they're small enough as it is, it just creates all sorts of nightmares. They haven't been able to keep him off the glass, and then Amari goes and calls him lucky just when you think, you know, Lamar might disengage after a good game. He keeps him engaged for another one and motivated. But then, you know, I think the real killer maybe is, you know, they're only really relying on three reserve guys with Brown and Farmar, and they kind of just decided that they were going to let Farmar shoot, and, you know, like they did with Artest too. And, you know, Artest is a career scorer, and he can hit open shots. And Farmar, I don't know if they paid attention to the Utah series, but he hit threes all series, and so I don't know if it should be a surprise that he's 5 of 6 on the threes this series.
Right. Do you see that as another adjustment heading into Game 3 today, as far as trying to lock out the perimeter more?
Yeah, well, they just feel like they can't. They were playing a numbers game and trying to pick a Lakers weakness to rely on, and that's kind of always been the Suns' way, that they felt like they could outshoot teams because they're the number one shooting team in the league. But they picked the wrong guys, and maybe there is no weakness on this Lakers team if Artest is going to make open shots, if Farmar is going to make open shots. You know, they really did feel like their bench could be a difference, and because of their energy and their depth and stuff. But the killer part there has been Channing Frye. He was probably considered as key of a player as anyone coming into the series, because he's a guy that can keep them big on the floor and still stretch the floor with a shot. And his shot has been MIA since I think he hit a 3 in the first quarter of game 1 and hasn't hit one since, or hasn't hit a shot since. And that's so vital. They haven't really struggled efficiency-wise offensively, but just in rhythm and in, the way it carries over to his other end and when he's not making shots, then they're going with a smaller lineup, and then they can't contend on the boards and their rotations. And they really are hoping Channing Frye, who's always been a better home shooter all season, comes back to himself tonight.
And lastly, as you're well aware, Phoenix is coming off its worst back-to-back losses since December 1st through the 2nd against New York and Cleveland. And also they have the heavy task in being the first team in 47 attempts to win a series against a team that Phil Jackson's coach after losing game 1. Overall, how do you assess the Suns' chances of trying to come back in the series?
Next to no chance of coming back. I mean, given the disparity in performances of the first 2 games, I mean, they're trying to hold on to that old sports mantra that a series doesn't start until the road team wins a game. But they were beat so badly those 2 games. They hadn't had 2 games where they given up 2 playoff games where they've given up more than 120 points in losses since Showtime Lakers did it to them in 85. This was quite a beating, and they can make up some ground, but the thing that strikes me right now is they're giving up 58% shooting in those 2 games, and they had been giving up 43% shooting since late January. So, even if you just come halfway on that, you're still giving up 50% shooting and still in for a rough afternoon. So I think they can get one of these. I mean, obviously if they give game 3, it'll give them a lot of momentum and maybe, set up game 4, and then we'll all talk about how pressure momentum has turned, and it's just hard to see them winning 4 or 5 games against a team they're 1-5 against so far this season.
Well, those are the thoughts of the Arizona Republic's Paul Coro. Paul, thanks a lot for your time.
All right, good talking to you.